Welcome, thank you for joining us. My name's Neil, I work in the Research Marketing Department at read.co.uk, and the presentation we have for you today, we've tentatively titled read.co.uk's Rules of Attraction, which is perhaps not the most practical of titles. I think insight to help you hire early career candidates is probably the more practical side of things. I think it's really interesting, and what I was keen to call out before we got going is this point around us defining this conference as early careers, because I think time once was where we'd be talking about solely graduate recruitment. I think it speaks volumes that our industry has moved on from just viewing people as a certain segment in terms of those who have entered higher education, and recognise that for young individuals joining organisations for the first time, there are many routes into work. So that's a good thing, but I think the thing that makes it even more challenging is that it's gone from trying to define an audience segment of graduates into trying to define an audience segment of young people, and that comes with its difficulties and its challenges. Hopefully we're here to help offer value and insight. So, what do young people really want? And I guess the reason that we're all here today is to find out a little bit more about future talent. And I think it's worthwhile trying to frame this in regards to ONS statistics that recently came out. So, in regards to young people, specifically those between 18 and 24, if you look at them versus everyone else, there is a higher rate of unemployment in that 18 to 24-year-old category than there is against the rest of the working population, or the unemployed population as well. Which sounds like a negative statistic, but it actually makes sense when you consider that between 94 and now, the amount of people going into higher education has doubled, which means that those who are entering full-time employment is skewed somewhat. And as we already talked about, there are a huge proportion of that audience who aren't necessarily going into higher education and are starting off their jobs in part-time jobs, so they wouldn't factor into that kind of full-time employment rating. This is my son, by the way, 6 months old. That was exactly the reaction I was hoping for. Dead chuff. If you're interested in hiring him in about 18 years' time, just come and speak to me. It's just a shameless plug, really, isn't it? This is the 2002 black comedy film Rules of Attraction, starring James Van Der Beek, who you might recall from Dawson's Creek fame. That's not our presentation. We fell foul of giving something a title that we thought sounded really good, not realising we'd heard it before. Unfortunately, we've invested a little bit of money into the branding of it being Rules of Attraction, so hopefully Mr. Van Der Beek doesn't sue us anytime soon. But our research specifically, and what we're going to be talking about across the next few slides, this is a sample that comes from 500 odd 18 to 21-year-olds, but to phrase it in its right and correct form, this is a piece of research that's conducted on a much wider scale. So we have around 4,000 respondents of all ages and all kind of walks of careers. This is a piece that we've previously called What Your Target Candidates Really Want. And I think what we're able to do is not only draw out certain segments of the audience, in this instance a younger segment, but we're also able to contextualise it against what the rest of job seekers are wanting and highlight certain areas that we think are of interest. So here are some 6 very abstract, what we're calling rules, but there's a famous quote that's going around that says there's no such thing as rules, only guidelines. So I guess my job in the next however long we've got is to make these abstract sentences into something that's practical and useful for you guys. So we'll start at the top, which is a point around giving people a fresh start. So our audience, in this case, early careers individuals, are embarking on their first career. I think that's the police coming to seize me from the start of my presentation. So these are the people that are coming out of higher education or are coming from a part-time job into their first career. I think either way, it's really valuable to recognise that what we're giving people the opportunity here is the opportunity to invent or reinvent their careers. And we'll say what that specifically means. And the insight that we asked people for is what best describes their motivation for their job search. And again, just remember that caveat, that this is the 18 to 21-year-old age group. So the most predominant things at the forefront of their mind, their main motivations are in salary and location. And I think that makes sense. That makes sense if you consider all ages. Salary is at the forefront of what we want to do. We want to be able to fund our interests and hobbies outside of work. Particularly for this audience, if you consider that higher education element, there's a certain amount of student debt that people will want to work off. And again, for young individuals, there is that point around wanting to pursue interests outside of work too. Location being this high up, I don't want that to come across like a barrier in terms of we shouldn't only look to the people within a X mile radius, right? I think it's more of a nice to have. And I think it's not just relevant for young people, it's relevant for all of us. I'm sure we'd all enjoy a shorter commute. Not too short, though. I always think it's weird when people say they just want to walk straight from the house down the road to work. I think that's probably a bit too close. I want a little bit of distance, personally. But it's just quite interesting, and I'll circle back to why these 2 points coming up joint first in terms of priorities is interesting for this younger segment. The next is a much fluffier, nicer point to talk around, which is the desire to work for a new organisation. I think this speaks directly to that point around giving people a fresh start. This age group is looking for a career partner. They're looking for someone to help them in that first step of their career development. I recently read a piece that suggested the average the average time people expect to work for any organisation now is around a year and a half, which seems like an incredibly short time, certainly from where I once started. Now, I think that's quite a scary statistic, but I think it's worth remembering that whilst there is benefit for these individuals joining organisations and building their careers on their first step, there's also benefit to us as recruiters about being able to take on that kind of younger, fresh mindset, new ideas that are gauged towards a developing audience. And I think it could be mutually beneficial. I don't think we should let that be something that scares us or puts us off. So I'm holding this like I'm some sort of politician. I need to get a hold of myself here. This final point is a really nice point. It's around a fresh start. 20% of individuals that we surveyed, 18 to 21-year-olds in this case, suggested that a fresh start was part of the main motivations for their searching for a career. Now, this is actually number one when you branch out into all ages. I guess a couple of caveats to that. We ran this in January, which is peak New Year, New Me season. So there's that to bear in mind. But again, I think it speaks directly to that point of allowing people to, I guess if they're an older candidate, you're allowing and giving people the opportunity to reinvent their career. But in this instance, you're giving people that opportunity to invent their career. And I think it's a really nice message that we're giving people the opportunity and that we're being career partners for this younger audience. So I've repeated myself a couple of times there, so keen to move on. Right place, right time is our next section. And this speaks to several areas. One is the media that we choose to use to get in front of this younger audience. One, if you want to be super hyper-targeted, the time of day in which these individuals choose to participate in job searching. And another point is around the right time in people's careers and influencer groups, and we'll circle around to that shortly. Surprise, surprise, the guy from read.co.uk says that job boards are the number one use. Now, we always caveat that, yes, there are groans, and you're right to groan. We always caveat that with this audience that we surveyed, half of them knew that this was a survey from read.co.uk. So there is always going to be that engendered bias. People are going to, on a certain scale, tell us what we want to hear. But I do think it's worth calling out that the benefit to job boards, and we did specify in this, not just read.co.uk, job boards like read.co.uk. I guess the benefit to a younger audience of a job board is that it's lots of content in one place. And if you think about that ease and convenience of search, that might be the reason why we see job boards being a first port of call. But certainly if I think about it from a read.co.uk perspective, we understand the recognition, and the awareness and the intent from all age ranges of our own users. And we know that this audience, this younger audience, is one that we need to improve versus the older age range. So I don't want to paper over any cracks and suggest that we are absolutely brilliant at this, because we have challenges to get in front of this audience. And certainly that's where a lot of our marketing activities and investment is going to go in the next, not just year, but thereon. And I'd be perfectly open and honest about that. Your company website, again, stands to reason. If they want to find out about you, they know directly where to go to. So I guess the point to highlight here is how easy is it to navigate to the careers section of your site from your homepage. And I know that's a challenge that we all have. I know that fighting for a corner of that homepage can be really difficult. Search engines are high up on the list of priorities, and again, I think this speaks to a point around visibility that I'm sure with this room I don't need to hammer home too high. What's really interesting to us is that 30% suggested career services. So we asked people over the course of your search, please tick all of the methods, so that's why it doesn't add up to 100%. People selected everything they could do. So career services seems kind of old school a little bit, but I guess what this speaks to is there's an area of kind of guidance that people want, and they look to their own institutions to deliver that guidance and that first step. So it's not something we should discount just because it's not seen as new media. So what time of day do you search? And this is, again, a really interesting instance whereby an 18 to 21-year-old cohort is very different from when we branch out into wider age ranges. So 30% said before they leave for work, 30% again said on their breaks. But the largest cohort of that response suggested that when they're home from work. Now, what's really interesting here is when you widen this age range out, individuals will more often than not look for jobs the first thing they do when they wake up, so on their device perhaps, and the last thing they do before they go to sleep, before they go to bed. So I guess what this suggests to me is that with this younger audience, that is very much their time. And I think they've got it right in this instance. I think at a time when you're searching for work, it's very sensitive and it's something that you want to, it's almost like an element of you want to get it over and done with. So that's why perhaps as we get older, there's that need and that pressing urgency. When we first wake, it's the first thing that's on our mind. But I think for young individuals, it's just interesting to note that they take that time both at the start of their day and at the end of the day for their own uses, and they kind of gain that time back. Perhaps that's something that we can all learn from. Career influences is an interesting one. So we asked people, young people specifically in this instance, what are the audience groups that are most likely to play the biggest influence on your decision of who to work for? 45% said parents, so hence why if you're looking to hire Alex, I'm the person that you need to talk to. Close friends came up next, teachers, peers and siblings, but it's really interesting the impact that parents can have on somebody's career choice. Now, I'm trying to struggle for a practical insight to give you here that isn't invite parents into your place of work, but that might be something that we take away from this piece of research, and I certainly wouldn't discount the influencer groups that you can put yourself in front of in order to help you obtain an audience that are quite difficult and challenging to reach. A final point, and again, it's something that you'll all be aware of now in terms of the use and adoption of mobile technology. So 60% of that 18 to 21-year-old age range will apply for jobs solely on mobile, or certainly prefer that to be their method rather than laptop and desktop. We've done a version of this question for the last 3-4 years, and we've only seen that head in one direction. So if we don't have mobile optimized capabilities, we're missing out on a really large part of the audience. Again, you'll have heard that millions of times. So, candidates are customers too, is our next point. So this is a point, again, that we've used quite a lot in previous presentations, which is that recruitment is increasingly seen as a customer service. And it bears repeating because it's so important. And I guess this next stat can articulate as to why. So 73% of our respondents suggested that a negative experience during the hiring process will impact how they view not just your recruitment facility, but your products and your services. And that's a huge number. Now, what does that mean in terms of practical elements? What will those individuals that have received a negative experience do? 70% will share with their family and friends, which is significantly higher than any other age range. So I guess this speaks to the point around it's easier to share messages for a younger audience than it has been with anyone else, and it's not just a kind of a word of mouth. I think with the adoption of mobile technologies, WhatsApp, text and whatnot, and social media, it's very easy for you to share your experiences with individuals more than it ever has been before. 40% suggest that they will not use your products and services again, and again, that's 10% roughly higher than any other age range when you break it and separate it down. So there's a kind of a higher propensity for people to just be completely turned off by your products and services should they have not had an ideal hiring experience. 25% suggested they won't apply again. So essentially, you might be losing 25% of a potential recruitment pipeline just because they're not ideal for that role. It doesn't mean they might not be acceptable or better placed in another. So an interesting note. So what does this mean? It means that in order to better understand how we can deliver an optimum recruitment service or application performance, we need to understand what the expectations from the audience are. So we've got a few of those stats in here in this presentation for you. A lot of it is to do with communication and timely communication, and then a lot of it is a lot more challenging than that, and we'll call that out as we go along. So 80% of people expect confirmation of application, which isn't unreasonable and again is higher than any other age range. And 40% expect you to let them know you've received that application within 24 hours. 75% of individuals expect to be informed of an unsuccessful application. And I guess this speaks directly to the 18 to 21-year-old age range wanting to see a return for their investment of time. And a lot of this is around giving people the heads up that they haven't been successful in this instance just allows them that closure and allows them to reinvest that time into a new application service. But until we're able to provide that closure, there's almost that sense of, I've invested all this time and I don't feel like I've got anywhere. So where possible, if we can use automation to kind of help with this, then I think we'll see huge benefits, and certainly huge benefits to how you're perceived by an audience that you haven't been able to, in that instance, hire. In terms of no contact, if you were just not to get back to individuals at all, within 5 days, 25% of your audience will have assumed they're unsuccessful, with 80% lost to us after 2 weeks. Now, again, I think that's par for the course. What's really interesting, I think what gets really challenging is this point here around the timelines that candidates expect between application, when they expect to be interviewed and when they expect to be working. 90% of this 18 to 21-year-old age range thought that they would expect to be interviewed within a fortnight, and 80% expect to be offered a job within 3 weeks. Now, we know, especially at read.co.uk, that is simply not possible in those timescales. And again, the 18 to 21-year-old age range is the most demanding in terms of their expectations of being seen quickly and in work quicker than any other age range. So I think what this speaks to is, this is perhaps an audience that might not understand the challenges that we have, especially in terms of engaging with our hiring managers. There's just simply, sometimes it just simply isn't achievable, it isn't possible. But if we're able to use and communicate effectively at the earliest possible point and give people a timeline or a reference to the expectations around when things will happen at the earliest point, I think we'll be in a much better place. And perhaps these kind of somewhat unrealistic expectations will be measured. So I think as long as we're communicating to individuals that here's what you can expect from us, we're in a much better place. There's a whole bunch more on this, but for the sake of brevity and lunch, I will move on. Celebrate inclusivity. So this section speaks directly to the expectations around inclusivity and diversity within the workplace. And I think this speaks to that 18 to 21-year-old audience expecting their workplace to be reflective of what they see in their everyday world. So 73% of our respondents agreed that what a company does to improve diversity and minority recruitment is important. And here are the kind of the practical expectations. Here's what they expect in order of the highest expectation onwards. So they expect a commitment to workforce diversity. So if you have a pledge in place, it's important to speak about it, not only for your own organisation, but it does have a direct impact on your ability to hire talent of this age range. People expect to see a diverse workforce represented, and in this instance, we mean promotional materials and advertising. That is their common expectation. Show people. Brilliant. Openly communicate your hiring programs. So if there's any specific campaigns that you're running, don't be scared to share that information with your hiring audience, because it's a good thing and it's what this audience expects. And finally, any activity that targets recruiting diverse candidates, again, it's important to inform your audience or let them know what's going on. So don't keep it shielded, don't keep it hidden behind closed doors. Communicate it with your audience, because it's a real powerful message. And again, as we've highlighted here, it's kind of what our audience expects. And it's really important for that younger cohort as well, more important for this younger cohort than any other age range. I think the older age ranges, whilst they see it as important, they certainly don't see it as important as 18 to 21-year-olds. What's quite a startling statistic for us is that 25% of everyone that we surveyed, so not just 18 to 21-year-olds, this is everyone across all age ranges, suggested they felt discriminated at some stage in their search for work. Now, this is a number that we should treat with extreme kind of caution almost, or better understand, but we have to approach it in the right way. So we're committed as a research team to understanding this metric a lot better and being able to give practical insight into why this is and how we can get this number much further down. Next rule, shout about your success. Again, this point is all around kind of not being shy or almost embarrassed by a number of successes that we have, and hopefully removing some of those barriers that we have. If you're someone like me, I'm a bit of an overthinker. I don't like shouting about our own successes as a department, maybe as an individual. This is about getting rid of that, because again, it's something that your audience expects. And And there are very practical reasons as to why your audience needs to know this information. So we're going to cover 3 areas in this small section. We're going to be talking about commercial success and why it's important to share that with 18 to 21-year-olds, people success, and finally, talking about a commitment to CSR. So a third of the people we surveyed consider organisational, finance and health stability when it comes to looking for prospective employers. So by telling people about your business performance, it might seem perhaps boring to us as individuals who work in our organisations, but certainly in terms of your ability to attract an audience, it speaks directly to that point around people want to work for someone that's in good health, good stability, and they can see their kind of the long term of their career, even though they only expect to work for you for a year and a half. It is also a big deciding factor when choosing between 2 different job offers. So if you're going directly up against a competitor, if you're at least signposting the commercial success that you've had in your business performance, you're giving yourself a little bit of an edge, and if you're confident in your numbers, then you'll be able to hire staff over your competitors too. So that was a really interesting point for us. 39% of our survey respondents associate recognised brands with job security. And that's really interesting. We do an exercise, we perform an exercise, some of you might have seen it, where we ask people about their dream employer. And often it's a piece that's about brand recall, and it doesn't actually tell us anything about the real reasons as to why people select those brands. But I feel that this is it. And recognised brands come with that kind of entrenched idea that people know that business will be there and they want to be part of that success. So if you feel that you're perhaps not as recognisable as either other people in your sector, or you don't have that recognition that other brands have, speaking about your commercial performance will add to that element of security that people will feel having in wanting to join your organisation. So I guess it kind of ups its priority potentially. I'll leave that with you guys. People success, 18 to 21-year-olds application priorities. So these are the areas that people, moving away from what's the reason for your job search, we ask people, why would you apply for certain roles? And one talks about their career development, and that makes total sense for this age range, right? And I think the best way to articulate that is by highlighting people within your organisation who have developed and showing that you have a history for developing people. It's authentic, and it's a way of representing your people. So it's a really good instance of putting people and individual success within your organisation and communicating it outwards could play a huge part in your attraction campaigns. Company culture is also significant when it comes to choosing who to apply for. And finally, learning opportunities, more so for this age range than any other, fits in that top 3. So anything almost outside of the day-to-day responsibilities, any opportunities to develop not only your career, but your skills as an individual, we should be shouting about and we should be putting in front of people. And again, any instances where you've already got individuals who highlight that success and those authentic stories, we should be sharing those. And finally, this is a video that we've used in presentations previous, so if you've seen it before, I apologise, but there's this point around CSR. It is an expectation of this age range, and I think what better way to kind of share it with your audience in a fashion that isn't kind of cringy and self-patting on the back than to talk about what it is that you do, what charitable efforts you make, and the difference that they're performing within whatever communities. Because certainly, not only is it good for from a brand element and from a brand campaign, but from a candidate attraction campaign, it's significant too, particularly for young individuals who want to work for organisations who are giving back. You can offer real value to a younger audience in doing so and communicating any CSR that you perform. Coming towards the end of our presentation now and helter-skeltering towards some lunch. So here's a disco ball. People love perks. Who doesn't, right? Often we find this is the most talked about section of any presentation that we put together. And it speaks towards rewards and benefits and what people expect. And there are kind of 3 big themes that we'll cover off pretty quickly because they won't be new to you. Work-life balance comes up as the highest priority in terms of what people are looking for. And this speaks directly to mobile working, flexible working too. I think it's just an expectation of 18 to 21-year-olds. And I appreciate there are a lot of instances where that might not be something that we're able to offer, but where possible, if we can, we should be talking about it in our communications too. Really interesting was healthcare and pensions, which we thought was an area that was a little bit old school and a little bit old hat, and that a younger audience wouldn't have had an interest in, but actually it came out second in our poll. So I think whilst there is that study that suggests people only expect to be working for a year and a half in any organisation, there's a bit of a more longer term play here. So perhaps it's not as It's not as much of a commodity as that original piece of research suggests. And finally, any activity gauged towards improving individuals' happiness and well-being at work come out as big points around the expected themes, the expected rewards and benefits, and where you can gear those towards. And I think we'll end with some smaller perks. Now, I find this really interesting because this is a really good exercise in conjecture and what you feel versus what the audience expects. So, duvet days it came out quite high and significantly high in terms of, we said, what would be the ideal workplace perk that you could offer. Now, we're not suggesting that you offer duvet days. That's not the message that I want you to leave here thinking Read.co.uk have told me that I need to offer duvet days. I'm simply offering guidelines, not rules, guidelines. So the audience suggested duvet days is something they're interested in. And again, bear in mind, this is 18 to 21-year-olds. They expect a day off on their birthday, which is something that I've been speaking about today only because it is my birthday tomorrow. Again, humble brag. Free tea, coffee is a normal expectation, not only of this audience, but I think across all ages. Yoga sessions. Let's get flexible. Gym membership is high up there too. A quiet workspace, which is an interesting thing. So I don't think we would have seen it as a perk, but it's something that ranks highly in terms of people's priorities, what they want from an organisation. Free fruit regularly. And finally, sleep pods. I can't think of anything worse than having a nap at work, but I'm not this age range anymore, so there we go. So in summary, giving people a fresh start, which is all about understanding that we're giving individuals an opportunity to, in this case, for a younger audience, for an early careers audience, invent their careers. Being in the right place at the right time, ensuring that we're using the right media, targeting people at the right time of day, if that's something that we're interested in, and also other influencer groups, and bearing in mind that this is predominantly a mobile audience. Candidates are customers too, so understanding what the expectations are in terms of the application process and how we can best meet those. Celebrate your inclusivity. So if there are any activities that you're performing to make sure your workforce is inclusive and diverse, shout about them. And shout about your wider success, both from a commercial standpoint, but also tell the story of people within your organisation, because it's really authentic, it's what candidates want to hear. And finally, people love perks, whether it's the big themes or the small little things too. So that's all I had for you today. We're around all day, so feel free to come over and say hello and ask me questions. Thank you all very much for your time.